Hi, I'm Pete, and welcome to Just a Few Acres Farm. Well, today is the big day. It's turnaround day, where I'm actually going to start putting something back together for the MD tractor. I've spent 35 days since I pulled this tractor into the shop, tearing things apart, and finally, we're going to put something back together. And what better way to start than with the carburetor in the intake manifold? I got this carburetor kit from McDonald Carb in Georgia, and it's got gaskets, got a little square for measuring the float height. It has a quality needle valve and seat in it, all metal and brass, and all the gaskets and packings that I need. We're going to start with the bottom bowl. It's the easier side. Get the pieces together here. We'll put the bowl plug in first. And I know technically it's not a thread sealer, but I do use Permatex High-Tack gasket sealer to seal up here and there around threads, and I've always had good luck with it. And that's probably the only place where I'll use any type of sealer at all, because I've got gaskets for the rest of it. Next comes the fuel inlet with the screen and the gasket. Put that on. And then we have to deal with the float. Now the float gets a gasket here. That looks like the right one. Now we got to assemble the arm to the float. And this float sits in here like this, and this arm comes through it. And before we put the float in, we've got to put the needle valve and seat in. See, this is a quality needle valve. A lot of them come with a rubber coated tip now, and this is just metal, aluminum, I think. First on goes the seat. Down in there. The needle sits in there like that. But it has to go on with the float arm. It goes in there. Ah, that's tight. We don't want that. When the screw's all the way down, that binds up. And we don't want that. And I loosen it a little bit, it doesn't bind. This shoulder that comes off here binds on the end of the float arm when the screws tighten down. So what I did is I put in 2 gaskets, and that should keep the shoulder up high enough so that it doesn't bind. See, now we have a little bit of a gap here, which we want. Problem solved. Next, my INT manual, I'm going to check the float height, and they'll have a spec in here. From looking at the notes in the INT manual and the page provided with the carburetor kit, the float setting isn't entirely clear. It's clearest in the INT. There's 2 measurements given. One is for the fuel level, 13/32 to 7/16 when the float is up and the needle valve is closed. The second measurement they give is from the top of the float to the rim of the fuel bowl, and it's pretty clear in the INT manual. It's the rim of the fuel bowl, not the top of the gasket, which can be a source of confusion in setting these, whether it's the gasket or the rim they're talking about. So it's supposed to be 9/32 from the bare rim, and this one measures, it's got a slope on it, but it's a little less than 8/32. So I'm going to take this back apart and adjust the float downward. I'll just bend the arm a little bit to get to the right spec. Well, let's measure it now and see how we're doing. Wow, that's where it needs to be. 9/32. We'll make sure that the float doesn't bind anywhere. It's got good clearance all the way around. So that finishes the fuel bowl. Now we come to the top of the carburetor, and I got a lot more stuff to put on this. Well, it's always best to start with the last thing you took out when you were pulling it apart, and that would be the locking shaft, which locks the float in the up position when it's switched over to diesel. So I'll get all my pieces here. And this is just an odd assembly with this locking ring that goes on underneath this brass fitting. bend those tabs back up. And then we've got this shaft that goes in, but there's a seal on the outside of it. It has to go on first. That shaft goes in there. If I look at the diagram, see you've got this whole business going on the shaft, and it's unclear which way this shaft faces, which is where my photo documentation comes into play. It can go either that way or that way, and I'll look. So from looking at my photos, I know that this arm is about in this position when everything's installed, so that'll tell me where to put the cam on to the slot on the end of this rod here. But first I have to assemble all this. First on is a spring, and then we've got a washer retainer, which is one of these guys. And I've got two matching ones and one larger one. I suspect it's the larger one because the other two go to the choke butterfly. Yep, that fits in there. So we've got that piece. Now we have to look for the felt that goes inside of it. We've got two matching felts here. Sometimes doing this is the process of elimination with a carburetor kit because the parts aren't labeled. I bet you it's that one though. See if we get a tight fit on that shaft. Yep. First we'll work on this retainer and felt. Get it on there. Then this goes in. Work it through the felt. Which is nice and tight, which is a good thing. And we know we've got this angle when we're done, so we can use that to locate how the cam goes on. There's a wear mark on the cam right there from that sleeve, so I know that this side goes into this. It's these little clues that help you figure out which way things go. And then with the lever in the position that I know it needs to go in, the cam will only go on one way. I can't put it on this way or it won't do anything, and it'll hit this back housing, so I know it goes on this way. Again, things only go together one way when you look at them carefully most of the time, and that's what I use as a guide. It's the little victories in life. I got that tightened on there, and now I just want to test it before I go any further. Just put a couple screws in this to hold the bowl in place. I can hear the float rattle now. No rattle, so I've got it right. Next we'll put on the choke plate and choke linkage. Get all my parts here. They provided me with a new ball to go in the detent, which is nice. So the choke's got packings and retainers on both sides. And I've got two that match here. You just go in there and the retainer goes on. I put my little spring in here, and then if I didn't have a photo record, again, you can always pick up clues to how things go together. So I've got two ends on this, and the question is, well, which way do they go? Well, if you look at the underside of them, here's where the detent ball rode on this plate. So I know this plate goes on the side with the detent ball, and I know that the detent ball rides in this path, so it goes on this way. In order to put it in, let's just set the detent ball in there. Work it through. It sits just like that and works the choke that way. This is a weird choke because the two of them meet in the middle. And then this one goes on the other side, and the question is, well, which way does this one go? Well, it's got a stop, a set of stops on that side. So obviously it isn't going to go like that because the stops will never contact it. So now when I've got this set all the way clockwise travel and this set all the way to clockwise travel, I got two holes that line up, so I know it's correct. Since linkage is split, we can pull one side out and slip the choke plate in. You can see here's another instance where things only go together one way. The holes on the choke plate don't line up with the linkage holes because the plate needs to be turned 180 degrees. It's designed to only go in one way. So we slip it off. flip it around 180 degrees. And they do in that orientation, so I know that's the right orientation. This spring vent always goes in the direction of airflow going in, and it provides a little relief, air coming in, when the choke is closed all the way. I put a little thread locker on these screws. You certainly don't want them coming loose and going into the intake airstream. Now for the other side, before I set it in place, I want to put the tent ball in, which is tons of fun. Fits in there all right. Push that in, get that aligned. A little thread locker on that one. There's a choke. Next we want to put in the air valve, which would normally be the throttle butterfly, but as we know this is a fixed air valve, and it has to have proper clearance to the top of this, from the bottom of this plate to the top of this. And looking at the INT here, it's supposed to be 3/32 to 7/64 of an inch. This has been shimmed up, so I'm going to take out the shims and see where it falls without them. Take them all out. So we've got that gap, and we'll take a measurement here with the handy dandy ruler that came with the rebuild kit. There's 30/2 of an inch. So we want 3/32 to 3/32 and a half, which is what we got. Next, this plug's got a seat on the bottom of it. It seals against the inside of the body, so there's no need for any kind of thread sealer here. This stays open. This is the drip port for when the carburetor floods. It's connected to a copper tube that goes down to the bottom of the engine. And the fuel nozzle and the metering well, which go together like this, and get screwed into this hole here. I actually was wrong. I know what happens. Was wrong in the first video when I disassembled it. The mixing doesn't occur down in this chamber down here. Actually, the fuel sprays into this little hole and gets caught in the incoming airstream coming through, and that's where it mixes. Even stranger than I thought to begin with. Next is the fuel inlet tube. So that's all the pieces and parts to put the carburetor back together. Now we just got to put the two halves together. And I normally put this middle gasket in dry in case I need to take it apart and adjust the fuel float level or anything else. And there's never any problem with leakage through this. As long as you get the gasket faces clean when you clean it up, not a problem. There we go, one carburetor ready to go. Of course, everything else is not going to be ready to go for a long time, but this is ready to go. Now for the intake manifold. Remember, I broke off a bunch of screws on the butterflies for this. And a viewer commented, oh, they were staked, which is a clock-making term. And he was correct. You can see the prints on the bottom of the screw where they used probably a press to pinch on both sides of the screw and squeeze it in place so it was locked in, so there was no chance of the screw coming loose and flying into the intake airstream. And the way that they had to do it, because of how far the butterfly sits down in, you would have had to put a small vise down in there and press the screw that way. So anyway, I broke them off. I'm going to drill them out to the next size. They were number 8 screws. I'm putting in number 10 fines. So we'll go ahead and do that first. Now we'll tap these holes for the new screws. Actually, I forgot what I want to do is I want to drill out this top hole a little bit larger so the screw doesn't thread into both the top and the bottom. So let's do that. Next, we'll put the shafts in. And there's only one way these can go in. That's the theme, really. If you can't remember where things went. Usually when you look at them, you'll figure out, well, they can only go in one way. So I know that this long rod goes in this side because this one's got the contact on it, the short rod, and the hole for connecting the magneto disconnect is over on this side. So that one goes in there. And one way I can verify the orientation of which way this goes in here is it goes with these screw holes up on the flat spots there where the screws seat. So there's only one way these can go in. So now that I got the rods in, I can put the actuator that snaps it back and forth from the linkage. And I know from my photos, it goes in with the nut side facing this way up. And here's the tapered pin, which comes in from this side and connects like that. Now to put in the butterfly valves and to know which side each one goes and which faces up, I know there's a 12-degree mark on these, and these always go up to the side that you're looking at. So I know that it goes this way up. I also know that this one goes in this side because I marked it up more when I was pulling it out, and I made a note of that. So I know which side up and which side left or right it goes into. The next job is to just get it in there. Tap it in with brass. Now the trick here is that both holes have to align perfectly in the rod before I can turn the butterfly over and put the screws in, and everything's real tight in there. So it isn't the easiest thing to do. I'm getting close. I just got to get those screw holes lined up. Ha! There we go. That's the way it's supposed to be. The 12 degrees facing up, the screw holes line. And when I turn it, it opens up. She got a little dinged up, but that won't hurt her as long as the edges are clean. Now we can put the screws in. I'm going to use some red Loctite on these and some locking washers to keep them in. All right, now for the second one. That up. 12-degree mark goes down. Now comes the hard part. That was easier than the first one. Alright, go ahead and put the screws in. Now we'll hook this over center spring back up. Goes on like this. There we go. Now this side gets the magneto grounding mechanism. And that mechanism goes together with Bakelite plates on either side. Screw down the middle. There we go. Get everything aligned in here through the screw hole. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm not sure whether I'm going to use a magneto or a distributor, so I'm going to leave the gasket sealer off of this side, and I can put it on later. And plus I would have to open it up to run the wire terminal into there anyway. Put the cover on. Now on this side we can put on the gasket with gasket sealer. And that's it for the carburetor and the intake manifold. They're all ready to paint and put back on the tractor. And they go together just like that. Of course there's a gasket that goes in here, but I won't put that on until I mount the carburetor. What I'm going to do with the carburetor is I'll put it in a gallon Ziploc bag so that it stays nice and clean, and tuck it away someplace safe. This goes in the parts pile and we can move on to the next thing. Thanks for joining me. I hope this was informative, and I'll see you next time.